Welcome to the Corporate Venturing Insider Series, where we interview practitioners of corporate venturing. Today, I am so happy to have Paolo Bavaj, head and founder of Henkel Tech Ventures. Paolo, welcome. And do you mind maybe spending 5 to 10 minutes to talk about your journey into corporate venturing?
Yeah, sure. Thank you very much for the invitation, and thank you very much for the opportunity of the discussion. I'm a PhD chemist, and I started really in the chemical industry. So after my PhD, I thought I have enough from these small little glass flasks. So I wanted to go into larger scale. So I started in manufacturing in the typical chemical industry environment. I started with Höchst, which then became Chinese Chemicals. I was there for 15 years, and new business development was also there. Really my interest and where my energy was. And then 11 and a half years ago, I joined Henkel Adhesive Technologies, so the material science business of Henkel. And I led the corporate strategy and business development team. And we looked into two facets. One facet was the operating business. So we did develop portfolio management for the operating business, making sure that the investments of the company are going where the return is maximized. And on the other hand, we were looking at innovation. So we had actually, I think, about 3,000 innovation programs in place with roughly 1,600 R&D people. And the largest project in innovation was less than 10 million euros. So the adhesive technologies business of Henkel was at that point in time 8 billion euros. So a 10 million euro business, had not enough impact from an innovation perspective to that business. So we basically thought about different approaches, and we had a kind of two-tier approach. So one point was we should not forget about these small projects. We still need them, maybe not as many as 3,000, but we still need the small projects in order to constantly renovate our product portfolio and to secure organic growth, right? I mean, answering basically on immediate and significant customer needs to respond there with little product tweaks here and there. But if you really would like to develop larger new businesses, then you need a totally different approach and you need different people. So I presented an approach about new business development. And then the company told me, yeah, sounds interesting. You can pick 3 people and we will revisit the activity after a year. So I did pick 3 people. We developed some nice opportunities. We developed, for example, a particular technology for plastic welding of 2 very different plastic materials, which is still an issue in the automotive industry, for example. So we did develop these opportunities, and everybody was super happy with what we did. And that was then moved into new business development. And since the general approach in R&D in Henkel is very much tech push driven, we said that for new business development, we really need to do market pull. So of course, when you do market pull, the inherent disadvantage is that you cannot necessarily develop the technologies yourselves, which you need for the market opportunity. So you need to look for those technologies outside of Henkel. And at some point in time, it was really tight. We were almost not finding the right technology, but then we found a startup company in California with that technology which we were looking for. It was actually a kind of high barrier layer for OLED materials. And so that was our first investment then in March 2014 into that startup. And then we did another investment in Boston into a startup which was a carve out from the MIT in summer 2015. And then everybody got excited about startups, and because up to that point, nobody or only very few people in Henkel had an idea about the startups. I mean, they were probably thinking that startups, these are the young guys sitting somewhere with their computers in the basements, drinking Coca-Cola and eating chips.
Like in the movies.
Yeah, exactly. So, so it was actually great to show them that startups, are really very serious and top-notch scientists who can develop stuff which we cannot develop, and not because we have stupid people, because we are in a different environment. We have different technical setup and different skill sets and capabilities from a technical point of view. We got interested more in these startups. We wanted to make a more systematic approach to it, and that was the point when we invested into VC funds to generate a deal flow and to have also people to discuss certain investment opportunities with. Yeah, and that was basically the starting point of Henkel Tech Ventures.
Very nice. I have so many questions. I have so many questions, but I will first double click on your background. And here, Henkel is a very deep tech company. Okay, you have a background with PhD. I think you could probably say yourself a scientist.
Yeah.
How much of that is needed for your position, but also how much of that is helping you in your position?
That's a good question. So I think in my particular position, you don't need to be necessarily a scientist, but you need to have a good technical understanding. So because, we are looking for startups in the area of material science and in the area of digital business models related to materials. So you need to have a good technical understanding. You need to understand what the startups are doing. I have people in my team who are still scientists, and they do the deep technical evaluation of those startup companies. But you need to have somehow a technical background, and I would say also a commercial experience helps a lot. So it's like new business development, right? It's really a hybrid kind of skills what you need, technical and commercial. You can argue what should be the academic background and what can be trained on the job. Could be maybe also the other way around, but in my case, I started with a technical education.
This makes sense, and so I can see how this is helpful for skills. But maybe there's also a bias that comes from it. You love technology.
Yeah.
You're going to love the technology you're going
Absolutely.
to review.
Yeah.
In your company, you even mentioned was or still is tech push driven. And so how do you make sure that this bias are mitigated when you look at startups?
So, of course, as technical people, or as a technical person, I sometimes fall in love with the technologies because I really have to say that some startups are developing really super fascinating technologies, things which I didn't think are possible. So it's a great world, the world of startups from a technical point of view. So and we have basically two problems. One problem is to judge on the technology in an objective way. The other problem is to make a judgment if that technology will ever be commercialized in the future. So if somebody cares and somebody is willing to pay money for that technology.
Yeah.
So what helps is to look at that startup from many different angles, and these different angles come from very diverse team members. So I have 8 people in my team. The team is super diverse, so not only gender diverse, but also from a cultural aspect, diverse, different nationalities, From an educational aspect, so I have chemists in the team, I have an engineer in the team, I have business people in the team, I have even a psychologist in the team. So many different educations and also different professional backgrounds. So we have people who were looking back to a long-standing Henkel career. We have people who joined us fresh from the university, and we have people in the team who had a quite significant career outside of Henkel and then joined Henkel later. So in this diverse team, these different people provide different aspects and angles on a particular startup. And with all these different opinions, we can come to a conclusion which we think is the most realistic conclusion we can get.
Well, first I have to say I'm very impressed of the diversity with 8 people. I mean, this is really impressive.
It's amazing. And I can tell you, I mean, from a maintenance perspective, it would be certainly much easier if I would have 8 Paolos in my team. But then the outcome would be very one-dimensional. So I'm very proud about that team, and I can tell you everybody is handpicked because the art and the underlying problem is, of course, you can hire diverse people, but the real difficulty is not to hire diverse people. The real difficulty is to hire diverse people who can work in a team, who can act as a team. And that is not so easy. So this is why everybody in the team is really handpicked.
I want to triple click on this because actually that diversity combined with inclusion, because at the end, you can have a diverse team, but if no one can speak their voice or influence the decision making, no point. Yeah. But here I can see that, and actually I love what you said about it would be so much easier if you had 8 Paolo. Yeah. But 8 Paolo would mean 1 brand. Exactly. Here what you have is 8 people with 8 brands that all bring value. Yeah. Can you walk us through how you ensure that everyone brings their voice and actually influence the decision making? Because this is not easy.
Yeah, yeah. So we have 1 person in the team who is doing all the technology assessments. So from him, we are getting a very good opinion about how real is the technology, how relevant is the technology, how does the technology landscape look like. He makes also judgments on the IP. So that is extremely helpful. And then we have the people with the business background who also relate with our operating business, and they just probe what the startup is doing with our operating business, and then we get their opinion if they think this technology can be successfully commercialized. And then I mentioned earlier that we also invested in the financial funds, and we also have certainly a discussion with them, because our problem is we see 1 startup at a time, and we don't see necessarily the big picture because we are not looking in a particular technical area for the last 15 years, but the sector specialists of the fund, they did that. So they looked at 15, 20 years into very particular technical areas, and they can help us if that technology is great, but we should really look at this other startup, which is much better and much further progressed in their development, and they have better chances to get commercialized, or if we are doing the right bet. So I think we have different instruments in place, providing the different opinion, and we have a systematic process in place to make sure that we also collect the input from all these different angles. And then we have team discussions, our internal developer with the team where everybody contributes, and also the people who might not know that startup in detail. I mean, they get from the others what the startup in principle is doing, and then they also give their opinion, saying, this really looks cool, but who cares? Who's paying for that? Who's the customer? And I think it's a very good and systematic process. Our EVP, so the head of the adhesive business, he is always saying, it's like an evaluation machine. And this is really what it is.
And this is all about decision making. You have to look at every angles and look at all the things that could go wrong with a startup, but also how good it could go.
Exactly, because we need to make a decision, but I mean, we cannot afford not making a decision. We have to make a decision. The decision can be the wrong decision, but it should be the best possible decision to our knowledge, and that's the approach. You can still be wrong, of course.
And you could argue that not making a decision is always a wrong decision.
Yes, exactly. That's not an option for us.
So one more question I have, and you mentioned one of your team members has a psychology background, which is not obvious for a deep tech CVC to think about. So can you walk us through how you got to choose that profile?
Yeah, so he's an interesting person, and so in the end, I think we are looking for the right characters, for the right personalities, who I said will bring the entire team forward, but also provide a different perspective on the startups, on the founders, and so on. And he just did that. So if he would not be a psychologist, I would have still hired him.
Very nice. Okay, I like that candid answer. There's something you also mentioned in your journey, and this is more the journey of your CVC, which is that you searched and searched, and you eventually found a startup in California in 2014, and then you found this MIT spin-off in 2015. What you didn't say, but I think I want to touch on that, is you needed these early success stories to prove the model of the CVC itself.
Yeah. No.
Okay.
Because just to do the investments are not really success stories. I mean, there was a lot of hope with these investments, and people were excited that we were able to find them. But a real success story for me is if we translate the technology of a startup or their business model into a new business for Henkel. And this is, of course, something which we didn't do. No, but I agreed with our top management that new business development, be it through a venturing activity like we do it or other activities, need time to provide really success stories. And I told them we need probably 5 years to really have a success story in place. And it's your choice if you would like to provide these 5 years to us, if you are willing to protect us 5 years or not. And if the answer is no, then that's okay. But then we better don't start that journey. And they did say, no, of course, we understand that and no problem. And I have to say, I mean, in all fairness, they did protect us for even more than 5 years and were very patient with us. And now they are seeing the first new businesses being established based on startup technologies. And they are very happy that we exist. And I think what happened right now is that until our first success story, they thought, that team is a cool team and they do cool stuff. But back in their head, they were doubting a little bit the relevance for Henkel. So we were a little bit like, in Germany, you say der bunte Hund, so a colored dog, right? I mean, everybody knows you, but everybody laughs about you and laughs what you're doing. But what's the serious value you're providing? And now with the first success stories in place, which came in a few years ago, that mindset totally changed. So now the operating business is approaching us very frequently and often and saying, well, we have this problem, we need that particular technology, for example, for car batteries. Can you help us? Can you find a startup which has that technology or which can help us to develop that right technology? So it's turned around. So the consequence is that we have more stress. So because we have now all these inquiries, but I always say this is very good stress. I really love to have that because that shows that people are more and more convinced that we are relevant for the company. And one of our top executives, he said at one point in time, well, in the first place, I thought it's a little bit throwing money out of the window. But now I'm convinced that Henkel Tech Ventures is a strategic investment into the innovation activities of Henkel Adhesive Technologies. And I thought this is great. I mean, this illustrates the change of the mindset. And so now we are basically, you could say, riding a wave, and the wave hopefully never ends. So we are very busy with proving out that we can find the technology the operating business is looking for, and we can help them to build new businesses.
And I think you can build on top of that wave, because now you start to have all these business groups coming to you with requirements. It's for you to transform this opportunity, but it's easier to transform them when you know about these requirements.
Yes, exactly. What we assumed something in the past, and of course we talked with them a lot, that we communicated very often with them, of course. But if they come with a certain topic and with a technical challenge, that's of course the ultimate insurance that they really mean it and it's really relevant for them and they're really desperate looking for a solution.
Yeah. So one golden nugget you just shared, I think, was this 5-year protection plan. It feels like carpet selling, but actually I can really see why it's so important, because you made the point that if we can't protect it for 5 years while it takes time to build the strategic value, it's better not to start. And maybe I will double click on your statement, better not to start, because there is a reputation cost not to do it well. Can you touch on that?
On what?
On the better not to start if you don't have this 5-year protection.
Yeah, I mean it's very obvious, right? I mean when you start such an activity like venturing or like a new business development, and you started after 2 years, then some controller is approaching you like, we have a little problem in our bottom line, and we take half of your budget, so don't worry, and you will get it back at some point. You never get it. So then these activities painfully die, and you have 2 problems. One problem is, of course, if these activities painfully die, you don't achieve anything. But the other problem also is that you spend an enormous effort before to build an ecosystem with startups, with other VCs, other CVCs, other institutes, and so on. So you build this innovation ecosystem, and you leave a very bad taste in that ecosystem if you painfully, scaling back and until you are not seen anymore. So I think it's number one, you don't get anything done. Number 2, you really damage the innovation reputation.
And maybe we should touch on your fund structure. Is it structured as a fund? Is it a commitment from the balance sheet? How do you plan reserve and follow investments?
So we invest directly from the balance sheet. We simulate a fund, but that's simulation by our finance people. So we really invest directly from the balance sheet, and we have a certain frame in that simulation which we can use to invest. But directly from the balance. We didn't see a value to build a financial fund, because the big question really is, how do we provide value to the company? And it's very clear that we don't provide value by financial gains from buying and selling startup shares. We are not a financial VC, absolutely not. Of course, when we do investments, we are always making sure that we make financially sound investments, and that we are doing what makes sense also from a financial point of view. But the motivation to do a certain investment is a pure strategic motivation.
And would you say that because of that, when you do invest in startups, it's even a stronger signal? This is a partnership signal from Henkel Corporation to the startup.
Yes, absolutely. So we could say we are here for the long run, and this is actually very true. So we have no pressure to sell our shares in a startup at the end of a fund or something like that. So we can really keep the shares of a startup until their technology is really developed and until they were able to commercialize that technology and were able to do a very good exit. I think nothing is worse, in particular in the area of material science, because there everything takes a little bit longer and is a little bit more expensive than when you do e-commerce platforms, for example. So in the world of material science, you really need that patience, and that is very important. And you also have to imagine that the startups are very often working with very significant large corporates as customers, and the message, Henkel does not support anymore the startup, that don't continue to invest into the startup, is a very bad message to the startup's customers, and can very negatively impact the commercialization of the startup. So it's important that once you started working with a startup, once you invested in a startup, that you stay with them until they either bankrupt because it didn't work out well. I mean, that could happen as well, or they successfully did an exit. But there is nothing in between. It's really black and white.
And so just to test your statement, does it mean that as long as they continue to sustain the strategic partnership, you will continue to keep your pro rata rounds after rounds?
Mostly, yes.
Okay.
The question is, when it's always a case-to-case decision. The question is if that is needed. So we had, for example, a case where it was important for the startup to bring additional strategic investors on board, and then we said, okay, then
you give
space. This getting diluted because we see the additional value from this investor. So, but in principle, yes.
Okay, I think you're managing to combine strategic intent with ecosystem commitment, which I think is really good for entrepreneurs.
It's absolutely needed. If you don't show that commitment, you are not serious.
Yeah. Now, what happens if in a year or even in a quarter you start to have 2-3 very good startups you want to invest? Do you have any special mechanism to handle more investment that you had budgeted from the balance sheet, or how does that work?
So there's a backdoor, because it is a balance sheet investment, and the balance sheet of Henkel is actually quite cash rich. So we could then go to the board and say, here we have these very extraordinary investment opportunities. We understand it goes beyond the financial model which we have in place, but it would be very bad to miss these opportunities. And then they will decide in the board if they give us more leeway or not. But there is an escalation route in place.
Okay, so in a way you have a built-in flexibility when needed.
Yeah, this is why it's very important that our EVP, the head of the adhesive business, is our supporter, because he has to go to the board and make that call for us and so on. So I mean, you always hear very often how important top management support is.
Yep.
I think we feel it very frequently, how important it really is. So I can only underline it is important. You cannot underestimate that.
I think we can say it's critical.
Yes,
and
absolutely.
That touch on something which is, I've heard so many times, which is a CVC is only a CVC when it survived one CEO change. What's your view on this?
So we have now the third CEO in place until we were founded. In the beginning, yes, but I think it's only true for that period, that starting period where you need to
5 years.
Yeah, then there is important that you don't have a CEO change, or that the new CEO understands very well why we exist. But now I would say it's I wouldn't be afraid about any change in our top management because the collective operating business sees the value we are providing. So I think right now it's clear to everybody what kind of value we are providing, and nobody will doubt that.
And I think maybe this is part of the model you're promoting, which is you need champions to make investments, which means you've built a set of champions in the organization that could all support why you need a CVC.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. So we work with our strategic business units, with their top management, their leadership team very closely. For one reason, to vet our ideas and to get feedback on the ideas, but on the other hand, also to learn from them firsthand. What do you need? Where do you see your business is going to? What kind of future do you see for your business? And what kind of technology and business models do you need in order to make that happen? So it's extremely important to have a good communication with the leadership team of our strategic business units.
And here maybe I will ask any guidance for the audience in how you build early champions, because this is more of an art than a science.
Pick the right people, because so this is how we did it. I mean, the SBU heads, for example, are very powerful in any organization, and this is why they and very bright people, and this is why they have this position, so they have a lot of impact. But we don't work the exact same way with all SBU heads. Sometimes it's the people who are more or less receptive to working with startups. And sometimes the nature of their business, the nature of their industry is more or less receptive to working with startups. And we very carefully pick the ones where the startups could provide a lot of value because they are in a, for example, fast-growing industry, where also a lot of startups are developing technologies for, and where we have the right people in the leadership team who are very open for open innovation and working with startups. And then with them, you can build these success cases, and then the others will follow. This is what we clearly see. The others follow. They see the value you're providing for these guys, and then they're approaching us and saying, "Hi, we saw that. This is really great. Can you do the same for us?" And sure, of course. But they need this, leading by example kind of mechanism.
Yep. Golden nugget again. I think this is low-hanging fruit. Look for people who want to engage with you, that can bring value to startups, and get started there.
Yeah,
absolutely. Let's go a little bit on the investment process. So you have a team of 8. Does it mean that it's you deciding on the investments? Do you have an investment committee on top? How does that work?
Yeah, we have an investment board in place, which is basically 4 division heads in adhesive technology. So these 4 are basically leading our operating business, and our top financial person is in that investment board, and they decide about if we are going to start a particular investment process or not. If we start the investment process, then we follow a certain mechanism, and we do confirmatory due diligence and so on. But the most important milestone for us is that investment board where our operating business in the end decides about the strategic relevance of a certain investment.
I see. And so do you need all of them to vote yes?
Yeah. So that was a discussion we had. So I said, maybe it's enough if it's a majority vote, and they say, no, we don't want to, devalue or undervalue the counter opinions. I said, okay. So we everybody needs to vote with yes. If the majority is voting with yes and just a minority with no, then I can escalate to our EVP, and he makes then the final call.
Okay, so you do have an ability to recover.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Now back to your team of 8. Do you need to get also consensus before you decide to go to the investment board, or can you drive non-consensus investment?
We could drive investments without having a consensus in our team, but it would not be very wise because, you know, if you have a team member running around always saying, you know, I don't think it's a good investment, and then if something happens to that investment, this person would then always say, I said it from the beginning, this is not a good I mean, this kind of attitude you really don't need. So we never did that. We always had the consensus of the entire team, but we technically don't need it.
Very good. I want to also ask you questions because you were in corporate strategy before.
Yep.
How do you see the CVC and the corporate strategy team working together? And do you have any best practices here you could advise?
Yeah, so I think it's very important that they work very closely together because in corporate strategy, you basically think about from a macroscopic level, what are the industry trends the company is exposed to, and what does that mean for the development of the business.
Yeah.
But they normally think maximum 5 years ahead, normally 3 years ahead. And we are thinking much further ahead, but in different directions. So, and the truth is always in the middle. So I think the strategy functions are sometimes grounding us a little bit and challenging us and making sure that we are not dreaming up something. On the other hand, we are inspiring them and making sure they also think in unconventional ways. They also think about topics and technologies and business models they might not have thought before. So I think it's providing values from both sides. And these discussions are super interesting and super important to have.
Very nice. I want to shift gear. So I will talk about strategic value. And the way I see strategic value is to the startups and to the mothership. And so let's start with a startup. How do you see the strategic value or beyond strategic to them? How do you make sure that you deliver on that?
Yeah. So first of all, the strategic value does not come from an investment. The strategic value always comes from collaborations, and this is why the collaborations is really the core of what we are doing. So we are running currently 80 different collaborations, and we did 10 direct investments. So we are doing direct investments if we think a collaboration needs to be closer, tighter, and we need to be more engaged in the collaboration, and then we can do an investment, or we sometimes also use investments as a precursor for a later acquisition. In the past, we were very much focusing on starting collaborations and then on the investments. And the effect was that the collaboration somehow died because the communication between the startup and our operating business was not always easy. They didn't really speak the same language and got frustrated with each other because of misunderstandings. So I said, okay, if we really would like to provide value out of these collaborations to the operating business, we need moderators. And so I have one person in my team who is not doing anything else than being the enabler, facilitator, moderator of these collaborations. He's making sure that if you, for example, would like to onboard a startup as a supplier, I mean, this is a nightmare process in each corporate, and in particular for a startup company. So he makes sure it's not a nightmare for the startup, that the startup goes through that process, gets the process explained, and everything is transparent and clear. Also, commercial agreements, technical agreements, working with our lawyers. So we make sure that the lawyers don't get frustrated with the startup. and that the startup is not getting frustrated with us. So I think this function is super important, and we really see an effect since we have him in place, and this is almost 2 years. We really see a significant increase in these collaborations, and we also see that collaborations are lasting longer and really delivering on their value. So what we do is when we start a collaboration, we establish certain milestones, and we establish what's the overall goal of that collaboration, and then we follow up frequently. Are we still on track? Should we continue the collaboration, or should we stop the collaboration? I mean, it's technology development. This does not work out all the time. So it could be that we say, hey, we don't think this will ever come to a good end. So why don't we stop it here? So we have limited resources. The startup has limited resources. They should spend their resources on other collaborations with other people where they can probably get more value and have more impact than with us. So that's also part of the truth. But very often the colleague is super successful in really driving the collaboration to providing value for Henkel and the startup. It's very important that both will get something out of that.
I think that's one more golden nugget. To have this position, or a team, once it grows to a big portfolio, it's moderator, it's facilitator, it's remove friction, it's account management, it's maybe even business development.
Yeah.
How do you call this person today, the job title?
It's a collaboration portfolio manager.
Oh, that's a good one. Very nice. No, but it says what it is. Collaboration. Yeah. I mean, you've said the word probably 30 times now, but this is what you're really driving towards.
Yes.
Now,
absolutely.
On top of collaboration, you kind of implied that maybe there is also a path to M&A. And I want to understand whether this is always an option for you, or if it's something that's rare. And how do you handle it differently, whether M&A might be a path versus not?
So if we just run a collaboration, it's rare. If we invest into a company, it's a real option. So when we invest into a company, at the moment when we invest, we consider an investment, an acquisition by Henkel as a viable exit. If we will end up with acquiring the company, will be seen. But this is definitely an option at the moment when we invest.
Okay, so it's a very strong signal. Does it mean that you also negotiate special terms on the side letter, or you leave that for next time?
No, we don't negotiate special terms. This is then goes back to the comment in the very beginning that we do our investments like a financial investor. So we invest at market terms. Nothing special, no particular rights for us. Because for us, it's important, when you invest into a company, we have certain strengths and skills, but we also have weaknesses. So for us, it's important, ideally, that we co-invest with financial VCs, because they just look from a very different angle on a certain startup. And if we wouldn't invest at market terms, we would never find good financial investors as co-investors.
Yeah. I feel like I'm saying it too often, but that's one more golden nugget, which is you need to be a good actor to be able to invest with good co-investors, whether they're financial VC or CVCs.
Yeah. And we do understand that, and this is always what I'm telling our top management, because they always ask for that. Do we have a first right of refusal? That no, we don't. So I'm always telling them that if you would like to acquire a certain startup, it's a competitive process. It's an open, transparent, competitive process. You really have to bid the right amount of money and the right environment, setup, circumstance, and so on. But the investment will always bring us into the pole position of a later acquisition, because, and in particular in terms of the timing. So we know through our board participation when is the right moment, the best moment to acquire a startup, and this is actually quite useful. But the terms are as for anybody else who would acquire the startup.
It's a very good best practice. Now, this leads to a question about potential conflict of interest when you're on the board of a company. Can you share best practices around that? Because clearly you have an advantage. You're building intimacy with a startup. You know their progress. But at some point, if you make that switch to decide, okay, maybe we should do an acquisition, conflict could arise. So what are the best practices you follow?
So we don't run the acquisitions with our team. So we have an M&A group in Henkel, and they run the acquisitions. And we are even not part of that process. And we shouldn't, because it's a conflict of interest, right? I mean, as investors, we would like to have a very high price. As Henkel, we would like to acquire a startup for a very low price. So it's a conflict of interest. And so we keep that extremely separated. So you always, have these and talk about these Chinese walls between CVC and the operating business. But I think we have also Chinese wall between us and our M&A department. And that is very important and gives also the startup the security that the M&A group does not negotiate based on insider knowledge, insider know-how, but that they have a very objective view and act as a potential acquirer.
Very nice. So we talked about strategic value to startups. We even talked about collaboration that could lead to an acquisition. How about the strategic value to the mothership? And here it's always a touchy subject for CVCs because it's always abstract. But I have a feeling that actually you're making it quite scientific. So how do you quantify and visualize this strategic value?
Yeah, that is actually not fuzzy at all. So Henkel is a company with clear KPIs in place, and the KPIs are financial KPIs. So as I said, our mission in life is to build new Henkel businesses based on the technology and business model of a startup company. And we measure the revenue, the Henkel revenue, based on a startup technology and startup business model. And that is also done by the colleague who is hand-holding the collaborations. So this is what we are doing. So we are forecasting the commercial success of those collaborations, and then we are measuring what's the real actual outcome of it. And this is basically what it is. We also measure other soft things like how our funnel looks like, how big our deal flow is, and how many collaborations we have in place, and how many investments we did. But this is all interesting, but not more than interesting. Yeah. What the company really cares about is what is the revenue we are generating by these startup collaborations for Henkel.
Yeah, and this is everything. Moving the needle.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I think that's fair.
In a way, your KPI sounds very much like a sales KPIs, where revenue is clearly the golden KPI, and you have pipelines that you track. You have to be careful that they're not vanity KPIs, like the number of investments you review. But at the end, it's about moving the needle.
Yeah.
Now, to be fair, this is easy to say when you have had the CVC for many years and you start to already have this happening. But the first 2-3 years of your CVC, you didn't have these KPIs, right? So how did you build the KPIs that translate strategic value?
We always had that KPI. We always said, this is our KPI. The value of the KPI was 0. And also the target of that KPI was 0, but we always had it. And we are, as I said, we're also reporting things like the size of our deal flow and the collaborations. So we have in our collaboration model, we have 5 different stages, and we are reporting how we are moving the company through these stages, how much dropping out of that process, how much are surviving that process, and how much are really ending up in a commercialization stage. So we also measure per collaboration the milestones. So we also measure activity, and that is important in the beginning. When your generated revenue is 0, then you need to show that something is happening, and that this what is happening will eventually end up in Henkel revenue. And we are still doing that. I think I think both things are important, to measure the real outcome and to measure the dynamics which should lead to that outcome, because that will reassure everybody that there will be a significant financial outcome in the end.
What I like about what you described is that the end goal was always clear.
Yeah.
And what you're measuring initially is you're doing the right things to build towards that outcome.
Yes, exactly.
Okay. Which means that on year 1, year 2, year 3, you're measuring this building the pyramid in a way that gets you to that outcome.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Now, I want to talk about your Tech Ventures Week, because I've seen some of this on LinkedIn, and I was so impressed that you're doing this kind of very high professional events where you connect the startups with Henkel, and quite widely. So first, tell me how you got this idea and why did you go for such a high quality bar?
So the idea came from our 3 key objectives what we are doing. So the objectives are, of course, finding the right startups and to initiate collaborations, tech scouting, but also knowledge sharing. You know, we meet a lot of fascinating people, and we see a lot of super interesting technologies and great business models every day. And we learn a lot every day. But it would be much better if our organization, our operating business, our colleagues would learn with us. So we thought about how can we share our knowledge, our learnings with them. And we have different things in place. So one thing is Tech Ventures seminars, which is basically webinars, which we do internally. Then we have our Tech Ventures Lab, which is a platform where we file non-confidential pitch decks from the most promising and we think most interesting startups that we see. Normally it's like 50 a year. And then we have Tech Ventures Week, which is more than an event. What we are doing is doing open innovation with startup companies. That is something Henkel didn't do 10 years ago. So what needs to be done is basically a cultural journey, and Tech Ventures Week is that cultural journey.
Oh, very nice.
It's basically the journey, making sure people understand we have a great culture in place. That culture brought us to a 20 billion euro company. Nothing wrong with that culture, but there is that aspect of open collaboration with startups was missing, and Tech Ventures Week is about to implant that cultural aspect. And in Henkel, if you do events, you better do it top notch. It's for presentations and it's for events. If you do it with a very low quality, the colleagues will say, no matter how interesting the speakers were, but the people will say, that was really bad. I couldn't really see it, and the sound was not clear enough, and who actually was guiding the camera. Sometimes I couldn't see it. So they would always talk about these bad things. So this is why you need to have really top-notch quality in place in order to make sure people accept it, people like it, and people can then take something from it.
And how do you measure success at the end of that week?
We don't.
Okay.
So we tried to measure how many people did sign up and how many people showed up, but we are not doing it anymore because how much does it tell you? We have 26,000 people in adhesive technology in Henkel. So what's the goal? What's the target? Is 2,000 a good number? Is 300 a bad number? Or is 300 of super interested people a better number than 2,000 participants who are using that as background radio? So what is a good number? So we don't do it. What we do is we collect feedback from the people who joined, and we also collect feedback from some people who didn't join, and we ask them then what what did you like? What took you away from it? What kind of value did it provide to you? And we asked the people who did not participate, why did you not participate? Why didn't you think it will provide value to you, and so on? And we are trying to learn from these more qualitative feedbacks.
Very nice. I think it's really about engagement with the right team members.
Exactly.
Yeah. Now, there's one more thing you did, which is a crash talk. Can you talk about this one?
Yeah, so I was always intrigued by the fuck up nights, and I always, when you work with startups and in the innovation area, you always say fail fast and fail big. But that's not necessarily a culture in a corporate. Failing is sometimes not really an option. And I have to say that the failure tolerance in Henkel was not very high. So I thought we need to make sure people understand that there's always a chance in a failure. There is the chance to learn something from a failure. So I was intrigued by that concept of fuck up night. We couldn't call it fuck up night in our corporate environment. It's a global business. We are active in almost any country on this planet. So need to come up with a little bit more with a name which is more suitable for a large corporate. Yeah, exactly. So we came up with crash talks, and so we are inviting top managers to talk about when they crashed in their career or a particular project, when a failure occurred, how they felt during that failure, normally very lonely and sad, and what are the 3 key things they learned from that and which others should learn from their failure. It's per case. It's a 10-minute presentation. It's really 10 minutes. It's timed. It's not 11 minutes. It's 10 minutes. And they get a certain training with it to make sure it's 10 minutes and on message. And they like it. People like it because it's a super fast-paced thing. It's 1 hour. And so everybody can spare that 1 hour. And you get, the nice thing is you learn something, of course, but also you get to know our top managers much better. I mean, you learn an aspect and a side from their personality, which you normally don't get because normally people talk about
never.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So you would think, this guy never failed. This is why he is in this top position. No, he also failed, or she also failed. And regardless of that failure, they are now in that top position. So failing and learning from a failure is not career prohibitive.
I nearly feel like this initiative could be extremely powerful for changing mindset. Yes. You're talking about Henkel is not an organization that lacks failure. The top management, I wouldn't say confessing, but basically sharing some of their failure. Yeah. This goes a long, long way.
Yes.
So how frequently are you planning to do it?
So we do it once or twice a year. So I mean, you shouldn't over. I mean, there are a lot of activities in Henkel, and we shouldn't overload the colleagues. And we also need the time to well prepare these things. So we do it twice a year normally, and and the people like it a lot. It's part of that cultural journey. It's part of making sure we are open-minded. We embrace open innovation. We embrace what other people did develop outside, and we also understand things sometimes don't work out. No problem. Stop early, but stop it if you see it's not working out, and repurpose and do something else which looks more promising.
So I just make the observation for the audience. Here, this is going beyond what a CVC do. It's not part of the day-to-day activity, but it's an opportunity for a CVC that is interacting with the innovation ecosystem to share that kind of mindset, but not directly. It's not Henkel Tech Ventures sharing this. It's enabling this sharing from the top management to the company.
Yeah.
And I think I would probably end on this, which is you are taking advantage of the CVC function to go beyond just the operation of the CVC and to go into the how do you change and evolve the mindset of a company to be much more failure accepting and innovation welcoming.
Yeah.
Paolo, I want to thank you for your time. Many golden nuggets along the way, and I love your point about the cultural journey.
You're very welcome. It was really fun talking with you.
Thank you, Paolo. And I look forward to meeting you face to face very soon.
Yeah, absolutely.